Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a topic so fundamental, it literally sustains every single cell, every organism on Earth.
Water.
It really is.
Right.
It's this molecule we see everywhere, but its underlying chemistry is, well, it's just bizarre. It's completely unique, and it's the absolute bedrock of all biology.
Absolutely. So for our deep dive today, we're looking at a core biology chapter that breaks down how this simple H2O molecule gives rise to four extraordinary life-supporting phenomena.
Right, what biologists call emergent properties.
Exactly. Our mission is pretty straightforward. We're going to walk through water's structure, its four key properties.
So that's cohesion, moderating temperature, the whole floating ice thing, and its power as a solvent.
Right. And its role in pH. We want these concepts to really stick with you.
And we can start with that image you might have in your head, a ringed seal, just resting on a huge sheet of sea ice.
It seems totally normal, but you have to ask, why does that ice float? Why doesn't it just sink and freeze the entire ocean solid from the bottom up? And the answer to that question, the very existence of aquatic life under that ice, it all comes down to the truly unusual chemistry of water.
So where do we start?
We have to start small with the molecule itself.
Hmm?
So water is V-shaped. You've got one big oxygen atom at the point of the V, and it's bonded to two smaller hydrogen atoms.
And those are covalent bonds, right? So they're sharing electrons.
They're sharing electrons.
So where does the weirdness come from? Why isn't it just a neutral molecule?
It comes down to a kind of chemical greed. It's a property called electronegativity. Oxygen is extremely electronegative,
Meaning it's like a magnet for electrons.
a very powerful magnet. It pulls those shared electrons much, much closer to its own nucleus. It basically wins the tug of war for electron density.
Okay, so the oxygen end of the molecule gets more of the electrons, giving it a partial negative charge.
That's the delta minus. And the hydrogens, since they've sort of lost that tug of war, they end up with partial positive charges.
Delta plus.
Exactly. And that uneven distribution of charge is what makes water a polar molecule. This polarity really is the whole game.
Because that polar nature lets it interact with other water molecules.
Right. The partially positive hydrogen of one molecule is just irresistibly attracted to the partially negative oxygen of a neighboring molecule. And that weak little attraction, that's a hydrogen bond.
I remember reading that a single hydrogen bond is incredibly fragile. The source says it's only, what, 1/20th the strength of the actual covalent bond holding the molecule together?
Oh, it's incredibly weak.
So why do we care so much about something so fragile?
Because of the scale. In liquid water, these bonds are constantly forming, breaking, and reforming in just trillionths of a second. But there are so many of them at any given moment.
A massive network of them.
A massive, constantly shifting network.
Hmm.
And it's the collective strength of these millions of fleeting attractions that gives water structure and creates all those powerful, life-supporting emergent properties.
Which brings us to the first one. Cohesion. That's just water molecules sticking to each other, right? Because of all those hydrogen bonds.
Precisely. And the most visible result of cohesion is something we've all seen. High surface tension.
Ah, okay.
The molecules at the surface are being pulled down and sideways by their neighbors, but there's nothing pulling them up into the air. So this asymmetrical pulling creates this tight, ordered film on the surface that's really hard to break.
And you see this everywhere, like a raft spider that can literally walk on water. It's not magic, it's just depressing that invisible film without breaking it. The cohesion holds the surface together.
Cohesion is also critical when you pair it with adhesion.
Adhesion being water's tendency to cling to other substances.
Right. And that duo, cohesion and adhesion, they solve one of the biggest puzzles in botany.
How on earth does water get from the roots of a giant sequoia all the way to the top leaves 100 meters up against gravity?
It's an amazing natural pump. As water evaporates from a leaf, it's called transpiration, it creates tension. It's like a chain. The molecule leaving pulls on the one behind it.
And cohesion keeps that whole column of water, that whole chain from breaking.
Exactly. And at the same time, adhesion, the water molecules clinging to the hydrophilic cell walls inside the tree, that helps fight gravity's downward pull. So you've got cohesion and adhesion working together to pull hundreds of gallons of water up a tree every single day.
That's incredible. Okay, so property 2, this one is huge for the entire planet.
Absolutely vital. It's water's ability to moderate temperature. To really get this, though, we need to quickly separate a few ideas about energy and heat.
Okay, so we have kinetic energy, which is just the energy of motion.
Right. And then you have thermal energy, which is the total kinetic energy in a body of matter.
And temperature, which is the average kinetic energy.
Exactly. And the classic example is great here. A swimming pool has way more total thermal energy than a hot cup of coffee, just because it's so much bigger. But the coffee has a much higher temperature because its molecules are moving faster on average.
That makes perfect sense. So let's talk about resisting change.
That's where specific heat comes in. It's the amount of heat you need to absorb or lose to change 1 gram of a substance by 1 degree Celsius. And water's specific heat is famously high.
Right. The source mentions it's 10 times greater than that of iron. If you put an iron pan and a pan of water on a stove, the iron gets hot way, way faster.
And the reason, again, it all comes back to the hydrogen bonds. When you add heat to water, that energy has to first be used to break those bonds.
Ah, so you're not immediately speeding up the molecule.
Exactly. The energy is absorbed breaking bonds first. Think of them as a massive energy shield. Conversely, when water cools, new hydrogen bonds form, and that process actually releases heat.
So water acts like a huge heat storage tank. It absorbs heat from the sun all day with only a small temperature change.
Which is critical for life. It stabilizes ocean temperatures, it moderates coastal climates, and since our bodies are mostly water, it helps us resist drastic internal temperature swings.
This also leads into evaporative cooling, right?
Yes, water has a very high heat of vaporization. That's the heat needed to turn the liquid into a gas.
And that process has a cooling effect.
A huge cooling effect, because the molecules with the most kinetic energy, the hottest ones, are the ones that escaped as gas. When they leave, the average temperature of the liquid left behind drops significantly.
Which is exactly why sweating cools us down. You're losing the hottest water molecules from your skin.
It's an incredibly efficient way to dissipate heat.
Okay, let's go back to our initial hook. The third property, floating ice. This is maybe the strangest one of all.
It's a true anomaly. Water is one of the very few substances that's less dense as a solid than it is as a liquid. Almost everything else shrinks and gets denser when it freezes.
But water expands.
It expands. As water cools down to 4 degrees Celsius, it behaves normally, it gets denser. But from 4 degrees down to freezing, something amazing happens. The hydrogen bonds stop breaking and reforming so quickly.
They slow down and lock into place.
They lock into a highly ordered crystalline lattice. And this structure holds the molecules farther apart than they are in the chaotic jumble of liquid water.
So same amount of mass, but more volume, which means it's less dense.
About 10% less dense, which is why it floats. And this is essential. If ice sank, lakes and oceans would freeze solid from the bottom up. Life couldn't survive the winter. That floating layer of ice insulates the water below.
And this has huge global implications today, especially with climate change. We're seeing the rapid loss of Arctic sea ice, which is critical habitat for seals, for polar bears. Their entire ecosystem depends on this weird density anomaly.
Now let's move to the fourth and final emergent property, which is maybe the most important for cellular chemistry. Water's versatility as a solvent.
The solvent of life.
That's what we call it, because its polarity lets it dissolve so many different things.
Okay, so let's start with something like table salt, sodium chloride, an ionic compound.
Right. When you drop salt into water, the water molecules swarm it. The partial negative oxygen ends are attracted to the positive sodium ions.
And the partial positive hydrogen ends go for the negative chloride ions.
Exactly. The water molecules completely surround each ion, forming what we call a hydration shell. They shield the ions from each other and pull the crystal apart.
So that's how it dissolves ionic things. What about other things?
It also easily dissolves other polar molecules. And this leads us to two really important terms in biology: hydrophilic and hydrophobic.
Hydrophilic is water-loving. These are substances that have an affinity for water.
Right. They're either ionic or polar themselves. Think about a cotton towel. The cellulose fibers are hydrophilic, so water clings to them and the towel absorbs liquid. It doesn't dissolve, but it adheres.
And hydrophobic is water-fearing.
Things like vegetable oil, they're non-ionic, non-polar. They can't form hydrogen bonds, so water sort of pushes them away, forcing them to clump together.
Which is why oil and water separate. And that's crucial for things like cell membranes, which are built on hydrophobic barriers.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on, we just need a quick word on how scientists actually measure this stuff in the lab.
You mean concentration?
Right. You can't just compare grams, because the molecules all have different weights. You need to compare the same number of molecules. So biologists use a standard measure called molarity.
Which is moles of solute per liter of solution. A mole is just a specific, very large number of molecules.
It's Avogadro's number. It lets you standardize everything. So if you make a 1 molar solution of glucose and 1 molar solution of salt, you have the exact same number of solute molecules in each. It makes experiments comparable.
Got it. Okay, final concept. This is about what happens when water itself breaks down.
It's a rare event, but it's fundamentally important. In pure water, just by random chance, a hydrogen atom can jump from one water molecule to another.
It just hops over.
Hops over. It transfers a hydrogen ion, which is really just a proton, an H+, to its neighbor. The molecule that lost the proton is now a hydroxide ion, OH-.
And the one that gained it is hydronium ion, H3O+.
Right. And in pure water, this is perfectly balanced. The concentration of H+ and OH- is exactly equal. The solution is neutral.
But then you can add an acid, and an acid disrupts this by adding more hydrogen ions.
It increases the H+ concentration. A strong acid, like hydrochloric acid, just floods the solution with H+.
And a base does the opposite. It reduces the H+ concentration.
Right. It can do that either by donating hydroxide ions, which combine with the H+, or by directly soaking up the H+ ions itself.
And to measure this huge range from very acidic to very basic, we use the pH scale.
It's a logarithmic scale where pH 7 is neutral.
And the logarithmic part is the key takeaway here, isn't it? A change of 1 pH unit is actually a 10-fold difference in acidity.
It's a massive difference. So a solution at pH 3 isn't just a bit more acidic than pH 6. It is 10 times 10 times 10. It's 1,000 times more acidic.
That's a huge difference, which is why biological systems need to stay stable. Our blood, for example, has to stay right around pH 7.4.
And that's where buffers come in. A buffer is a substance that resists changes in pH. It acts like a chemical sponge.
So if things get too acidic, the buffer soaks up the extra hydrogen ions.
And if things get too basic, it releases hydrogen ions back into the solution. It minimizes the fluctuations. Our blood uses a carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer system to keep us alive.
But this brings us to a really critical environmental issue, ocean acidification.
A terrifying real-world example of this chemistry in action.
So we burn fossil fuels, which releases huge amounts of carbon dioxide, CO2. The ocean absorbs about a quarter of that.
And when CO2 dissolves in seawater, it forms carbonic acid. This immediately lowers the ocean's pH, making it more acidic.
And here's the problem. Those extra hydrogen ions from the acid then go and bind with carbonate ions that are already in the water.
Which is a disaster. Because those carbonate ions are the essential building blocks that corals, crabs, plankton, all these marine organisms use to build their shells and skeletons.
The process of calcification.
Exactly. So ocean acidification is literally robbing them of the raw materials they need to survive. Yeah. It threatens to dissolve the very foundation of marine ecosystems.
Wow. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground.
We have. But it all comes back to that one simple polar molecule. We've seen how its structure and the constant dance of its hydrogen bonds create these 4 indispensable properties: cohesion, temperature stabilization, floating ice, and its role as the universal solvent. It really is the chemical foundation for all life on Earth.
It's just amazing. And, we've talked about these huge global phenomena, but let's bring it back to something really small for a final thought. The source describes how a common house cat drinks.
Oh, this is a great example.
It doesn't lap up water. It just lightly touches the tip of its tongue to the surface, maybe 4 times a second, and it pulls up a thin column of water right into its mouth before gravity can pull it back down.
And that tiny, fast-moving column of water stays perfectly intact.
Purely because of cohesion. The power of those fragile hydrogen bonds holding the water molecules together is literally how your cat is able to get a drink. The physics of that one molecule dictates the survival of everything.
From a redwood tree to a house cat.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us into the most vital molecule on the planet.